Well, I, like everyone, want to get into the discussion of remarks that Michael made, and then Holmes and all the stuff that he's doing, Energy Saves is doing, in the rural areas in particular, but elsewhere as well. So I just want to say maybe three things. Let's keep it simple. One, I don't see any real problem in principle financing as much clean energy or energy efficiency as you could possibly want. I think you're going to want a lot. Right now, I think on a world basis, it's we're consuming as a species about 17 terawatts. Everyone expects that to at least double. If you take world population, the UN says it's going to be 11 billion by 2100. Let's keep it simple, and let's say 2050. Let's estimate, say, 10 billion people. I would think you'd want them to be able to, to be consistent with the goals on economic development, to be able to consume at roughly, say, EU levels of consumption. That seems like a good goal for humanity. So that means you're going to need 50 terawatts, which means you're going to, more than need to double. You're almost going to need to triple. You are going to need to basically triple energy consumption. And again, as Holmes pointed out, 80% of what we're doing now is poisonous. It's fueled by fossil fuels. The remaining 20%, there's a bunch of hydro. That's about half of it. Well, a little bit less than half. There's a bunch of nuclear. That's, dangerous in own ways, whatever. The amount that is renewable in the sense of solar or whatever is only about 5% max of that remaining 20%. That's solar, geothermal, and other things. And of course, this is growing like crazy in the U.S., and I never meet a utility, especially out west, that doesn't say, hey, we're putting up another solar farm. The utilities love the solar farms. But we are, and we're making steady progress, and it is certainly going forward on a world basis, absolutely. Everyone was excited about the refrigerant agreement just announced the other day, and everyone was excited about Paris. But even if, all of the mandatory, all the obligations in Paris are conditional on the $100 billion being put on the table collectively, which is not really there yet. But even if all of the unconditional pledges and the conditional pledges, even though if they were put together and everyone did exactly what they would or had pledged to do or hadn't even pledged to do but sort of committed to do in Paris, we'd still be at least about 30% above the level that we need in 2030 to avoid the disaster of the 2-degree increase. So even Paris, fully implemented, and it's very, very far from that, it's barely started, is not going to put you anywhere near where you need to be in order to avoid truly catastrophic change. That's sort of the bad news here. But yeah, energy has a lot of value, and anything with value you can finance. We spend a huge amount on energy all the time. We spend about 9% of GDP. We're into several trillions of dollars, or well, short of 2 trillion, but about 9% overall when you consider all that we spend: gasoline and the oil and the natural gas and the coal and for that matter the wood. Okay. And if you've got something worth that much money, you can finance changes in it and redistribute it. We consume as a country about 100 quads a year. Quad, if you don't know this field, is 1,000 million millions. Using the short form, as they say, it's a bunch of BTUs. Think of it as a big bunch of BTUs. And we waste, according to Lawrence Livermore and other people, about 55%, more than half of the energy we consume we're wasting in various ways. It's going out windows in the buildings that Holmes was talking about and Michael was talking about, or it's going out our exhaust pipes, or it's heating things that are irrelevant to the intended purpose of the energy. We waste more energy even in our electric power generation sector than Japan uses in an entire year. That's a fair amount of waste. And if you've got a bunch of waste, you can make some money by reducing that waste. Now, energy is useful in the sense it's not quite comparable to, but it's got magnitudes certainly as big as the justice reinvestment stuff we were just talking about, because you are spending huge amounts of money on it. It's better in the sense that people are spending that money right now directly out of pocket, and you can save people money directly out of pocket by increasing energy efficiency. And this like all these things that we've been talking about, all of which run together, as we were joking with Margaret before, it's the transportation, the energy, the housing, it's all, it's like the yogi in the hot dog stand, make me one with everything. Do you know that joke? Well, it's a long joke. I don't know if anyway, people are standing in line at the hot dog stand. One says, make me a, hot dog with sauerkraut, one with mustard and sauerkraut, one with mustard, sauerkraut, onions, and the yogi comes up and says, make me one with everything. That's the joke. A typically unsuccessful joke by yours truly. Anyway, but energy, housing, transportation, and for that matter, water systems are very, very connected things in terms of their cost and in this. Because they are at that Maslowian level of very basic needs, the inefficiencies within them fall disproportionately on people without much money because they have no alternative to seek, reasonable shelter and some food and some water and some mobility and some basic communication. All those basic needs things on which we are almost grotesquely inefficient in the U.S. in providing fall disproportionately on the poor because they tend to be in areas where those things are less well provided, and also they have less income to take that non-discretionary spending out of. So there's an equity thing going on in all of this at the bottom of the transactions and also at the top. But there's a lot of money. There's a lot of money. Holmes described the page you save, the famous Harlan Lockman, Paul Sillo thing. I've been a fan for years, tried to push it through a group I work with called the Emerald Cities Collaborative. We do that in cities. We try to do it in states, et cetera. With less success thus far, I should say, than Paul's had, or that Holmes has had with the electric co-ops, but some success in some places. And that's a way to cover the renters as well as the homeowners. For homeowners, there are other sorts of things which have expanded tremendously in recent years. Probably pride of place should go to PACE, I guess. Property assessed clean energy financing, which is simply a way of putting it on your property bill rather than your electric utility bill. But if you've got something where you have demonstrated clear savings to achieve, and you achieve those savings, there should be no reason why you have trouble financing energy efficiency. And on the clean energy generation, let's leave out geothermal, just concentrate on solar. The price of solar panels, as you all know, has dropped about 80%, and the efficiency has increased tremendously in the last 5 or 6 years alone. So I'm sort of resolutely optimistic. I'm almost with Joe Rahm there on thinking that if you got a fair chance to compete between solar and our current sources, solar would basically win. We could win right now. The costs are coming down that fast. As we increase the production of it, the costs are going to come down even further. So what's the problem? Why aren't we just popping the corks? Well, the problem is that, and this does make it, I think, a little bit different than some of the previous cases, is that you have a tremendous fixed costs problem, and you've got a tremendous fixed costs and fixed investments and value, which is very deeply connected to a certain amount of, let us say, social capital or political oomph or political wealth or whatever. As Václav Simmel never tires of saying, it takes a long time to move from one energy system to another. There's still people in New England that are still heating their homes by coal. literally coal. There are some people who still, not hippies, but, working class households that still use, wood-burning stoves to keep. So it's not as if we made the transition fully even to oil, much less natural gas, much less to electricity or, other potentially cleaner forms of energy consumption. And all those investments in the old coal-burning power plants, as you see now, and a tremendous dispute around the clean power plant, or other sorts of infrastructure in the dirty energy system. People made investments in that. Some of them are fully amortized. Much of those coal power plants are in fact fully amortized, which is why they are now delighting in the clean power plant. They just switch from coal to natural gas, and they get credit all around. It's something we might talk about in discussion about the limits of that plan in terms of actually changing the fundamentals of the utility model right now in the U.S. But fixed costs, investments that are not fully amortized is something, or investments that are fully amortized where people still see the opportunity by blocking change to continue to get money out of older equipment. That's one source. But the big source, of course, is that, looked at globally, let's put our Bill McKibben hat on here. You've only got another 550, it's actually 565 or so gigatons of carbon left to emit in the world that we can, on the same UN estimates we've all been relying on, but it's the Intergovernmental Panel, it's not bad, give us any sort of reasonably reliable chance of staying below 2 degrees centigrade increase since pre-industrial times. We're already at 1%. We expect almost certainly, given thermal lags, stuff we haven't seen yet in effect, but have already done, to guarantee another 0.4, 0.5%. So we're about 3/4 of the way there to something which most people regard as catastrophic. And we only have, to avoid that total catastrophe, we've only got a budget, as it were, a carbon budget of about 550 gigatons. Okay, so you could put the world on a very strict carbon budget. You could really, ramp up all the renewable energy things you could imagine. Believe the folks from Stanford, we could do it easily in 30 years, with determined effort. We could be all solar all over. The Negev Desert alone, every 4 hours gets, the world's supply gets about 17 terawatts of power just in one place there. We can do this. But the problem here is not so much the investment, but the fact that people have already accumulated. I think the number is, I got the number here actually. As of 2 years ago, it was 2,795 embedded carbon, gigatons in booked reserves of oil and natural gas and whatever. That's more than 5 times the amount that we should be allowed as humanity to spend. And the booked value of that is in excess now of $30 trillion. So what you're talking about, basically, not to be crude here, but you're talking about saving humanity and taking $30 billion away from some people who really don't want it taken away from them, period. That's a really big political problem. That was the second point, that, we got a bunch of fixed costs and we've got a bunch of serious investments with people with a significant amount of power behind them that want to resist the transition, which is in fact possible and which could in fact be financed. That's not the hassle. The third point, though, is that along with this sort of macro, global struggle, class struggle, global struggle, humanities struggle, whatever you want to say, politics, I want to go back to something that Raphael Bostic usefully pointed our finger at, which is that whatever you're talking about, whether you're talking about housing policy, transportation policy, or energy policy, all the things that the yogi wants together at the hot dog stand, all of which tremendously make up the built environment, and all of which in different ways have tremendous effects on the public health that centrally animate your discussions here. Most of that stuff is really decided in state and local politics. You should really rid yourself, even if you do whatever location here, of the common fiction that the federal government actually runs this country. It doesn't. It doesn't. Energy stuff is almost entirely set at energy stuff, meaning policy. It's almost entirely set at the state level. Most housing, certainly housing access, is set, through the land use and developing, or developer plans, the land use, a variety of things around transportation, et cetera, that sets up the structure of housing markets. That's pretty much set at the state and local level. And transportation is also set basically at the state and local level. Of every dollar, we spend about $1 trillion on transportation, surface transportation in the U.S. Every dollar we spend as a people, only 3 cents, and that's on a good year when Congress has reauthorized whatever the latest transportation bill is. Only 3 cents of that is spent by the feds. There's another 9 cents which is spent by state and local governments. And then the other 88% is spent by us, navigating the built environment, built transportation environment that they provide. So really all the action is at state and local politics, which is something that I found over years of working in that area, national elites are hesitant to even seriously worry about, much less get involved in. It's an area of politics which is densely occupied by people not quite ready for prime time. It's an area which is even more intensely dominated by parochial business interests than our national politics is. And recently, and this is the thing to emphasize, it's also an area where our always non-progressive sort of race to the bottom, not floors, setting floors but not ceilings, but actually never setting floors on much of anything. Our very competitive federalism has become increasingly nationalized in a particularly ugly way. You see this in the partisan numbers. You all know about partisanship in Congress. We've got levels of polarization on very commonly accepted in political science terms, measures of partisanship. The level of partisanship now in the U.S. Congress is greater than at any level since the Civil War. We got good numbers going back to, the end of Reconstruction. Going into Reconstruction, it was so crazy, I don't even know if you want to measure that stuff, but we did have a Civil War in the U.S., remember. I don't know if you want to measure partisanship at that point. But if you go back to Reconstruction on forward, this is the worst period since then. That's a pretty high level of polarization. There's virtually no overlap anymore across the aisles in Congress. And this is an area where, unlike the public justice reinvestment stuff, I find at the local level the power of those fossil fuel companies to actually push against the ability to do clean energy development, the power of the utilities, the investor-owned utilities, who still depend on a model, business model. You can say it's outdated as long as you want, but basically that their model is to sell you more energy, not less. And it's 2 minutes, okay. And when you look at the actual distribution of political strength in the states, Cows works with Republican governors and other people all the time. We find it increasingly difficult. We can do a certain executive-led federalism, in which you got a cooperating governor, a Schwarzenegger here, or that was a very exceptional Republican governor, or a progressive transportation person from a Republican state there. But in general, what's happened, I find, and I think it's worth talking about a tiny bit at some point, is that you've got this weird nationalization of politics that's going on largely driven, I'm afraid one party is much more guilty of it than others, and that's the Republican Party. I live in a state, used to be a paladin of progressive thought in America. It's now sort of ground zero for how to destroy a state in 6 to 8 years. They're taking apart all the public goods, they're privatizing everything they possibly can, et cetera. But what's interesting is they're often doing so in ways which are clearly dysfunctional for the state's economy. So why are they doing it? The only explanation I can get is that they are actually more tuned to the national directions of the ALEC type organizations and the RNC than they are to the demands of the state. That's dangerous if you want to go back to where we started, where we have these healthy-based, resiliently financed, community-based solutions. Because in a lot of these states, people no longer really care about precisely the communities that you are so intent on wanting to save through better policy.